Sarah, for joining in with us in our interview series. And the reason why we're doing this across the globe with other women leaders is to address this pressing question, which is a $1 billion question, that why is there such less female representation at the top, especially in the world of investing? And is it that women like yourself are the outliers who make it in the world, or what is it really that has taken you to reach where you are, and how women can also follow the same path or take some inspiration? Because at the entry level you see so many women coming in, excited souls wanting to be a part of this industry, but as you move up the ladder you rarely see any women participating in boardroom meetings. So how has the experience been for you in the world of investment? Because you've done your engineering in college, and when you're 21 or 22, that's the turning point in your life and you decide your career, and you decided to get into business. So how did that decision happen, and from there on, how did you climb up the ladder slowly and steadily?
Okay. Well, let's see. So I did start with engineering. I really was interested in originally just how things were made. So went to get a mechanical engineering degree, which I thought was sort of the liberal arts of the engineering. Learned a little bit of everything, and then was very disturbed with how our engineers were being trained to design and make things. So really focused on green design and manufacturing. There was a particular lab at UC Berkeley that was focused on green design and manufacturing under the mechanical engineering umbrella still. And so I went there and got my master's and PhD, and I minored in public health and energy and resources, really focused in the semiconductor industry and how the electronics could be designed more sustainably and then recycled, and less power usage, et cetera, et cetera. And climbed sort of as far up the career ladder as I could at the behemoths in those industries at Applied Materials and Intel. And then they wanted me to do things that had nothing to do with the sustainability of the products. And so I shifted gears completely at that point and joined McKinsey & Company and did strategic management consulting, realizing or thinking that whether people applied my technical ideas really had to do more with business decisions than technical decisions. And so I really literally was like, I need to understand how business decisions are made. So joined McKinsey in their San Francisco office, where the head of the semiconductor practice sat. So at least I was in an industry I was familiar with, but doing completely non-technical work. And loved that work, but also didn't want to lose my technical background. And so eventually realized I would if I didn't jump back into tech, and found venture capital as what I thought was the perfect blend of not losing my technical background, and that I could still meet with entrepreneurs and assess their great ideas, but then have that management consulting hat on and be able to help with the portfolio companies with all the different business challenges they had. So I thought that sounded like the perfect blend of work to me. And found a great firm in San Francisco as well that was very hands-on with their portfolio companies, and did a lot of hard tech kind of semiconductor electronics investing. So joined that firm and loved it, and really realized, okay, I want to do this long term, but I also want to be a more helpful VC. And I saw in the industry, everybody at that time, this is out in the Bay Area in like early 2000. Actually, it was it was like the .com bust, and the shrapnel was still falling from the sky. So lots of great lessons to learn at that point in time. It was like 2004, 2005, 2003 sort of time frame. And so I realized I saw so many VCs that were pure investment bankers or management consultants than were VCs, and they didn't have that operational experience. And so I realized, if I'm going to be a VC, I really want to go get my hands dirty, so I have seen the other side and can really give better advice and be a better investor. So I found a fantastic opportunity working for the CEO of Advanced Micro Devices, a semiconductor company out in Sunnyvale. And so started there, and the CEO lived in Austin along with most of the executive management. And I had gotten my undergrad at UT Austin, and knowing I wanted to get back into VC one day, looked at the environment in Texas and saw a complete lack for the most part. I mean, there were like a few literally of VC funds, just very little, and yet so much money, so much capital in Texas, and so much entrepreneurship. So thought, okay, I loved Austin. So it was a much better place to raise a family, not have to deal with a horrible commute, et cetera, et cetera. So was able to move back to Austin with AMD and spent a little over 10 years actually at AMD. So more operational experience than I originally intended for sure, but just had so many great opportunities. So I can tell you more about that working up the career ladder there, but I worked for 3 of the 4 CEOs directly during my tenure there. There was lots of executive changeover. So in some ways it was sort of like being in management consulting still, you know, with so many different leadership teams, but did lots of merger and acquisition work, which was very relevant for getting back into VC because you're, you know, buying these VC backed companies and integrating them into a much larger company and seeing how the valuations are done and how the value is maintained, et cetera, et cetera. Ran several business units. And then was asked to be the executive sponsor of their Global Women's Forum as the only woman vice president who had any technical or operational background in the entire like 15,000-ish employee company at the time, very technical company, and the other 12-ish VPs were in G&A functions. So that was super, super life-changing for me because I realized not only was that true, but I had been totally unaware of it because I had been in semiconductors, in, you know, mechanical engineering and venture capital. My husband and I started a brewery. And so I had 2 boys, like my whole life was so male dominated. I literally was completely blind to it. And so that was more disturbing on a personal level to me than like, you know, I don't know, a business, you know, level, but then started doing my research, you know, well, okay, so if I'm the only person who can be this executive sponsor, what do I do with that role? Like, why should we have more women? And came across, I'm very data driven as an engineer, probably, you know, really dug in, did my research and found that when there are more women in senior leadership positions, whether it's, you know, VC backed companies, but Fortune 500 companies, tech companies, whatever, they do significantly better financially. And so I realized this is actually the most powerful business lever I've ever seen at a company. And how much easier is this to get more women in senior leadership here than to do all the other things that we were trying to do at the time. And so got very passionate about that, and also came to appreciate how hard it was to turn the ship, how hard it was to actually attract and retain more women and promote more women, and realized, knowing I wanted to get back into VC, that was actually a much more efficient way to get more women in senior leadership positions was through startups. And looked at those numbers and saw the same numbers basically at the time, still true today. Very few women entrepreneurs getting those VC dollars. It's like 2%, right, of, you know, women-led companies, just ridiculous. And even though they raise less money, they see significantly higher financial returns, just like in the big companies. And no one was really doing it. Like when I looked across the country at that point in time, they were, very generously speaking, 6 funds in the United States that had some kind of proactive gender diversity investment strategy. And so realized there was nothing in Texas, nothing in the central United States, if that's like a region. And they were basically just on the coast. And decided I had to start this fund. It was the best business opportunity I had ever seen and combined everything that I loved. Also realized I had never met another woman in venture capital. And so, and this is going back to my Bay Area days of, you know, all these, you know, banks that sponsored happy hours or legal firms that sponsored breakfast and had these big networking events. So it wasn't like just in my little 5-person firm, but, you know, in my networking, I had never met another woman, didn't know one. So, so realized that was an issue too, of like women GPs investing in women entrepreneurs. And so that's the shortest story I can give you on my whole career path.
Yeah, but one interesting note that I picked up from your story was that you've always grown in a male dominated environment in the corporate ladder. So, how did you manage to deal with men around and not see any women role models while growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started very early when I was, 17 or 18 or however old I was when I went to, mechanical engineering school. So I feel like I really separated early my professional kind of endeavors and my personal, and had the bathroom to myself. Even though I was at UT, which was a huge school, there were just very few women in the program. And so I think I just early on was like, well, I want to be a mechanical engineer. I want to understand how things are made and how stuff works. So, oh, well, I'll have friends over here, and then I'll, do my scholastics over here. And then when I got into, working, I was working with very senior men right away. So it wasn't like I had peers that were, so I guess I didn't feel as alone maybe as a woman, because I wasn't working with other people my age. I was working, at the senior executive level, and those were all men. So I was used to it, and I don't know, I have no excuse for not realizing it. But then, all the kind of BS of the corporate world and that stuff, I feel like I owe that to my dad to have dealt with, because he was such a I don't know, like a senior executive male, from an older generation, and said lots of things that to me that were, now I would be like, it would so not be appropriate now in this world. And so I just thought, oh, older men, they really like you. They just say silly things. Seriously, that was sort of my attitude. So I don't know if we're frozen. Looks like you might be frozen.
Hello? I
Hello.
thought it was just some power outage and I just lost the network.
No problem. When did it stop? I wasn't sure, because I realized you were frozen, but I didn't know when.
Yeah, but it's anyways getting recorded, so I'm sure that we've captured what you were
Okay.
saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But maybe my question is also towards the fact that what kind of statistics did you see while building up to Wealth VC that got you to make it only a women specific fund which will, invest into women entrepreneurs and their businesses?
Yes. So I knew I wanted to get back into venture capital. And when I, was this executive sponsor of the Global Women's Forum at a big corporate Fortune 500 tech company, and had come across those numbers, then it finally started, like, I was realizing, whoa, I've never even met another woman in venture capital, and let me look at those numbers. And there was no numbers at that point of like how many women were in VC. I just knew there were very, very few, and I never had met one. And there were some numbers, starting to be some numbers on. It wasn't like PitchBook tracked it yet or anything, but there was a group. It was called the Athena Project out of Babson Women's College that did a study and showed that, like, women led with a woman CEO or the woman, founded company, it was 1.9% of VC dollars were going to those companies. And then there were some other studies about the outperformance. Kauffman Foundation had done a really early study. And then there was there was another VC fund in the Bay Area that had done just their own best study they could do of like, their own portfolio and their networks portfolio, and trying to pull together these numbers, and just showed really great financial outperformance. So it was just early studies at that point, but they showed the same findings that larger corporations were finding. And realized I was on the mechanical engineering advisory board at that point for UC Berkeley and UT Austin. And they were some of the top public universities that awarded the most engineering degrees to women. And so we had a lot of focus on how do we attract more women into the departments or the programs, and then how do we retain them. and had found that they love to solve problems that are relevant to them, that their, mom had cancer and they want to figure out a solution to do something better in that world. Or, they are very, like me, I was just very disturbed with how we were training our design engineers to build things, which was an environmental catastrophe of like, okay, here's the problem. What type of metal should we select to start machining it? I'm like, no, there's a much bigger problem space that we have to explore before we start machining some metals. So anyway, I feel like my, and now that I've been at this for a while, then I'm on the College of Engineering Advisory Board now for UT, where it's, a much bigger kind of initiative. I have not met one woman engineer who literally isn't trying to solve some environmental or human health issue. And so I realized, and that's in engineering. So obviously but I realized there are more women that are starting companies or joining companies that are solving these critical environmental human health issues. That's where my interests are. In the state of Texas, with all the energy, infrastructure and capital. Houston's the largest medical center in the country. Yet there were the very few VC funds that did exist here were more B2B enterprise software. They weren't investing in these areas I was interested in, that I saw women entrepreneurs starting more companies in. So this is very self-reinforcing kind of opportunity where I thought, wow, literally this is the biggest blind spot and nobody's addressing this. And it's probably because there aren't women in venture. So they don't, the men just don't see it. They don't see that opportunity. They don't see those problems as much. And that's formed the thesis for the fund, which was we really are focusing not only women-led companies, but companies improving environmental or human health, because women will not only perform better financially, so that's a good reason, but women are making 85% of all consumer purchase decisions and 80% of all healthcare decisions. And so gender diverse teams or women-led teams in these particular markets, we thought would even do better than the, average financial outperformance, because they're on the front lines of buying all the products and seeing what solutions are there or aren't, or, or unsustainable disasters or great, and same thing with healthcare. They're making 80% of the healthcare decisions for themselves, often for their children, for their spouses, sometimes for aging parents in law, so they're making those decisions. They're seeing what problems are being addressed and aren't not being addressed. And so they have an advantage of not only creating solutions, but going to market and servicing those customers more efficiently, et cetera. So there was just a lot of synergy of focusing in these areas specifically for women-led companies.
Yeah, and like you said that you were one of the first to, spot this kind of an opportunity. How was it when it came to raising fund for yourself and getting money from the investors? Did you feel there was some conscious or unconscious gender bias towards you because you were a woman and raising a fund at a time when there were not many women-led VC firms investing only in women?
Right. Yes. But I also feel like I was in such a male dominated, had been in such a male dominated world. I was just sort of like used to it. So I don't know how to answer that question, because I think there's always been bias. So I don't know if it was more bias. I don't know. I do think it was hard. Just because, so I met my partner because she was literally the other woman in venture capital in Austin. That's how we were introduced at the time. And this is back in 2014. And then we slowly realized, whoa, we're the only GPs in venture capital in all of Texas at the time. And that was true for several years, which is just unbelievable. It's a big state, but we both had backgrounds in venture, but it was a new fund, and so with a different investment strategy, so we didn't have any track record. So I think that's the hardest thing, is that when you are not spinning out of a very established fund, having worked with a partner or several partners for a decade in order to have a attributable track record, to start another fund, you're starting from ground zero, which means you can't get investments from institutional investors because they're fiduciaries of other, people's money. They usually can't even write a check that small, but they certainly can't invest in a first-time fund with no track record. So it's really individuals and like some smaller family offices, that sort of thing, that you just literally need to go coffee by coffee by coffee to meet people and pitch. And so in some ways it wasn't hard as much as it was just so much work. My partner has a MBA from Harvard. And so some days we would be like, what are we doing? We're just having coffee after coffee, with people who may be investors, maybe not. We've got this, Berkeley Ph.D. in engineering, Harvard MBA, sitting here having coffee with people for hours. It just was like the most inefficient process. But it was how it had to be done. And so we tried to get more efficient, but it's just very hard to prospect people, when it's like an individual of how, what's your net worth? Are you a accredited investor? And it's very awkward questions that you can't really make. So it was a lot of work. And in some ways it wasn't the hardest work I did in terms of like intellectual challenge. It was more the perseverance it took of just, it's such a different schedule, such a different pace, such a different, inefficient kind of approach than I had ever done the rest of my life.
Yeah, but speaking of the awkward questions that sometimes come your way, did you also get faced by questions like, how would you manage a fund and a family?
I don't think I got that one. I've always done a really good job of separating, like I said, from a very young age, like my professional and my personal life. So I just don't even talk about my family or talk about things. So several of the CEOs I worked for had no idea I even had kids. Which it was shocking to me when I realized they didn't know that. But then I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I keep a wall up, which I think was for subconscious reasons of they wouldn't have asked me to do certain things and travel places and go, work on late night projects and stuff like that if they had known, for good intentions, I think. But anyway, so no, I don't think that necessarily people even knew I had kids or, but we did, our biggest question was actually, do you think you will have enough deal flow? If there's so few dollars going to these women-led companies and you're looking for companies specifically improving environmental or human health, are there going to be enough investments? And so when we were first, before we got into our first close and couldn't even make it public that what we were doing, or we couldn't make it public, it was made public. That's another challenge of fundraising. You can't market to any investors. It has to be very under the radar. So that makes it really inefficient as well. But once it was made public that we were writing checks to women entrepreneurs, we had this just, fire hose of deal flow. But up until that point, we were just, showing people the numbers. We knew those deals were out there, but we couldn't prove it. So that was the number one question. And now, now we have the data to show not a problem. Tons of women starting companies at 2x the rate of men. They're just not getting the money, but they're there.
Got it.
So that was the biggest question.
Got it. And how does it really take from having the first coffee to getting a check from an investor? How many meetings did it take for you, for example, to convert your first investor for the fund when you had started out?
Well, gosh, it was about 9 months from starting to fundraise to our first close. And all in all, I think it took, and then it was 18 months from our first close to our final close. So, 2 years and a quarter. Is that right? Yeah. So that seems really, really long. And we didn't actually, and then when we closed, by the way, in January 2018, It was at 19.1 million, so almost 20. But that made us the largest venture capital fund ever raised with an explicit gender diversity strategy. So it's so crazy to think, because that's like a nano VC fund, but it was the largest at the time. And so anyway, we were able to get to a first close, I think, because I don't know how many meetings. I think we didn't count on purpose because that'd be too depressing. And after we did our final close, look back at the numbers, and there's horrible statistics. It's like 70% of funds that, start fundraising never even have a first close. And then of those that have a first close and they file, and have their target raise in their SEC filings, 70% of the ones that have a first close never get even close to their target raise. So thank God we didn't see those numbers till after our final close, but I believe it, because it's so much work. It's ridiculous. And you have to invest yourself. That's another challenging thing, right? You're expected to put your own capital in. So you're fundraising for at least a year in most cases for first fund. In our case, it's over 2 years, not getting paid. And you're supposed to invest your own money. So how many people are in a position to be able to do that? Like, not that many. So anyway, we were able, I think one of the biggest challenges is having a real deadline, and there's no deadline for investors to invest in a first close. They can just wait around and see if it happens and invest in a final close. But a first close, you've got to have like really passionate investors and who seriously believe in you. We had been given an opportunity to apply for a grant through the Economic Development Agency. And I can get into that more, but it was basically, it required matching dollars. And so we were able to create a real deadline of, we need a commitment, a first close commitment, to have a matching dollar to get this grant that will allow us to, fund ourselves while we're fundraising and starting and launching this fund. So there were a lot of people who were interested in investing, but just we hadn't closed on yet, that we were able to have like a real deadline. So that was, I think,
it's incentivizing in both ways, by deadline wise and by your money wise also. Like, it keeps you going. It's not like you run out of pocket and feel like shit and nothing is happening, I'll rather shut down. It keeps you going
exactly.
on, that I'll still try and see, I'll get that one investor sooner than later. But you said
Yes.
that you invest in healthcare and environment, where you spot most of the women entrepreneurs. So do you think women get more inclined towards impact side of things rather than just burning cash and waiting for revenues to come and just taking investor money and growing fast? Is that the way how women approach things and their business?
Yes, there's some good data to support that, showing that women tend to start companies that are solving a personal problem that they see, something that they're really passionate about. It's not some financial arbitrage opportunity. It's something that, their mom or their sister or themselves or their child or some problem they see in the world. And so there's an advantage of that they have already done so much product market kind of fit testing, even if it's subconsciously, because they know it's a burning problem. And they're super passionate about it. So they have this like grit and perseverance that is above and beyond like, oh, it's not working, I'm going to go do the next thing. This is too hard. It's like they're really wanting to solve this problem and scale it, in the world. So anyway, that's I think what we've seen.
Yeah. And like you said, that most of these consumers in this space, at least, are women. Yet, some of the VC funds, which are not women led, don't have many women in the boardroom. All the decisions are taken by men. So, how effective do you think that is for a woman who's, for example, pitching a brand which is only for women, like innerwear or makeup brand? It's very
Right.
difficult for a male to understand that. So, how do you think it really differs when you have at least one woman in the boardroom evaluating a women-led business?
Yeah, I think there's some study that shows if there's a woman at a VC fund, they're 2 times more likely to invest in a woman founder and 3 times more likely to invest in a woman CEO. So there's good data to say just having one woman in that room is really important. And they don't have to have any kind of explicit, gender investment strategy, just having women present. My partner was the CEO of Dream It Ventures that invested in like 150 sort of pre-seed companies. And the other partners, GPs in that fund were men when she was there. And it was true that they would, so she was a woman in the room. So it should have been like 2 to 3 times more likely to invest in women, founded CEO companies. But many times they would be just going through all these, incoming applications for companies, and they'd be like, oh, makeup, like you said, not a fit, or we don't get that, or, oh, whatever. So whereas they'd be looking at like, automotive or something, or not traditional, I guess most things aren't traditionally feminine markets, but she would say like, wait a second, this is a business just like any other business. Why would we just disregard a fashion thing when we look at buses or something like that? Like, it's not like we're expertise in bus transportation, but we're looking at this deal. Why wouldn't we? So I think that even with the woman in the room, there's a big disregard for certain markets. And that's another huge advantage that women entrepreneurs have, is that they have the venture capital innovation engine has been so insular with men making the decisions over the entire lifetime of that industry, that there are huge problems that have not been addressed, that are not getting that innovation capital, because those particular investors just don't see the opportunities. In early stage investing is a lot of instinctual kind of investing where there's not many numbers to crunch yet. So you need to just have a feeling for the entrepreneur and that they're the right fit for this, and the market, and just knowing that it's a big opportunity. And when it's in women's health, you don't know, probably, is a man who's not maybe making all those decisions. Same thing with, that's a huge opportunity. Or just think, for when I'm taking these bets, I'm trying to reduce my risk as much as possible. So I'm just not going to invest in that market because I don't understand it. And so it's higher risk for me. I'm going to invest in a market I'm comfortable with, because then I know what's going on more and I can reduce my downside. So it makes very good rational investor sense, but it ends up that there's just these huge blind spots that really crave innovation that are not getting those, dollars. So.
Yeah, that's right. And in terms of approaching their pitches, women are said to be very conservative. Like, they'll only speak about what they're doing presently and talk about their achievements so far, and not speak of the bigger vision, because they don't want to speak of something that they haven't achieved, unlike men do. And most of the VCs like to spot the bigger picture. So is that the same case, what you have seen in women entrepreneurs while they pitch to you?
Well, it's so interesting because I see it at like pitch conferences, but we only invest in women. We won't even listen to a company's pitch unless we're like at a conference or something, unless it's women led. So it's a little bit harder to compare for me, but I mean, certainly the data says that. And we've in many situations have seen a woman's pitch, and it's like you said, I'm very comfortable with my track record so far in our current numbers, but the forecasts, we're not sure, or we can promise this. But, women just tend to like to under promise and over deliver, which is great for making investments behind people, right? That they're going to hit this, and then this is the upside, but it doesn't bode well in these, competitions when the men are like, we're going to go to the moon. And, of course, the investors want to hear that. And so we have coached our entrepreneurs to, or even ones that we're doing diligence on, of give us another forecast of, if everything goes right, you get the dream partnership, you get as much money as you want to raise, everything goes right in your R&D pipeline. What does that look like? Just to kind of force them to think, as big as they can, because that's not comfortable or natural many times. And women get dinged for it. There's a reason why it's not comfortable and natural. It's not because the women don't have the capability, but if you have the same pitch done by a woman or a man, the man looks like he's, gonna, whatever, to save the world and take it over, whereas the woman is looking arrogant and, so there's a massive cultural bias from men and women against women entrepreneurs versus male entrepreneurs, and that's been well documented. So women do have to couch it differently, and say it different, deliver it differently in order for it to come across well. So it's just trickier, unfortunately, for women.
Yeah, women investors like you do coach these entrepreneurs to follow the right path. But speaking of that, what is it that you really look at in a business now that you only focus on women? What do you look for from them?
So, for us, so much of it is our screen of, is that woman full-time on the team? Because sometimes the chief medical officer, science officer, they still are at university half-time or something like that. So they have to be really full-time, dedicated to the company in a C-suite or, founder kind of position with significant capital. And then, of course, in the markets in which we invest and early stage. So those are some of like the initial screens. It has to fit our investment thesis. But then what we look for is really, I'd say for them personally, somebody who is transparent and really perseverant. And it's more of a feel, like all of our companies, we go into pretty deep diligence before we invest. And so, we get to know the entrepreneurs pretty well. And you can tell, like if you ask a question, if they're giving you the canned answer of what they think you want to hear versus open kimono, like this is what I know. I'm still trying to figure this out. And I've talked to these 3 people, and like, who else should I talk to figure this out? Because blah, blah, blah. They're more transparent and problem solvers who want thought partners. And so that's really, really important for us, especially, in this early stage where you've got to listen to customer and market feedback because you don't know, you're doing something usually new. And so being able to take coaching and make sure you're questioning things and testing things and listening to that feedback is such a critical thing. So that's the number one thing probably. And then also just that perseverance and that passion that'll get them through the hard times. Because even if everything goes as like well as it could for a startup, it's going to be a seriously rocky road, with big downs in there. And so really making sure that they're in it to win it, for the long term, and can take no's and can take massive problems that they have to solve and still stay, focused and passionate about it. So.
Yeah. But do you think like the color of message really changes when a woman says that, oh, I want to make this brand 100 crore, company, which generates me good amount of revenues, versus when a man says that it's taken very ambitiously and in a very glorified way. But when a woman says that, there are questions as to how will you achieve that. And do you think that the perception can only change when there are more women investors like yourself who support women with their ambitions?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wish I knew the answer. I thought the numbers would change faster than they have with all this data that just shows, look, again, another study that these women-led companies financially outperform. But it just hasn't. And I don't know, because the bias is from women investors and male investors. So with these, that big TechCrunch Disrupt study that showed how both male and female investors asked the women entrepreneurs more prevention-oriented questions, and both female and male investors asked the men more promotion-oriented questions. So it's not, women investors aren't going to necessarily solve the problem immediately, because it's culture that's the problem. So I think first off, it's the women entrepreneurs just learning that they're going to get these annoying prevention-oriented questions, and they have to turn it around and smile and ask, answer it in a promotion-oriented way, which is super annoying. But the reality of the, this day that, or the years that we're on the planet here. And the way that I do think that women-led fund, I'd say funds that have a mandate or an explicit, well, not an explicit focus, but a mandate to invest in more women entrepreneurs who are really putting their money behind it, that will help. But I think the biggest thing is just more and more women having these wildly successful exits and having the capital to invest. So one of the things that we're really focused on is getting more women LPs, women investors, to invest in venture capital or in to startups directly as angels. For our Fund 1, 80% of our LPs were women, and that was unprecedented at the time. For our Fund 2 that we just closed in May 2022, again, 80% of our LPs were women, and we think that's really important because women are coming into an increasing amount of capital, and they are more likely to invest in companies that have a positive impact in the world. And they are a lot more likely to invest in gender diverse GPs, as well as entrepreneurs. And so we think that's the way to change this dynamic, is get women investors investing in funds, investing in entrepreneurs, and just bypass all this institutional investment crap.
Yeah. Do you think there is a gender bias or maybe disparity in GP network as well when it comes to men versus women GP? Because we rarely see any women-led VC fund.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there was a really great study you've probably come across called Women in VC that was done at the end of 19. It was published at the beginning of 2020, I think, but showed 2.4%, I think it was, of GPs like me and my partner Carrie that are really making the investment decisions, leading the deals, taking the board seats. It's 2.4% of those kind of VC GPs are women. So it's just hasn't changed much. And, at the partnership level, it's the associates and the analysts and sometimes the principals. It's not the true partners getting the carry in the funds that are women. And so it doesn't really change the investment decision-making, process or the outcomes. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. Sorry.
No, because there is very less study done in this as well, because most of people are, promoting entrepreneurship, and that's why they have figured out a discrimination between men and women founders, but rarely people speak of the GP network. Maybe you and I can initiate some study collaboratively together with some other women GPs.
Right. It's an interesting question. I don't know. We spend a lot of our time getting to know other GPs that are investing in women or, in sustainability or health. And so we're sharing deal flow all the time and, taking meetings and whatever, going to conferences and meeting our our colleagues just as much sometimes as the entrepreneurs, because that's actually a more efficient way to get vetted deal flow. And I don't feel it there. I don't feel the bias, but again, like I said, I'm not a good bench or a litmus test, because I come from such a crazy male-dominated world that sometimes I think I don't see it, but I don't feel it. Now that I am a lot more aware of it.
But do you see women in those meetups?
Well, I seek it out for sure. So I'm in, go to 𝐬𝐢𝐻𝐻. I'm in which is this program that's really focused on attracting and retaining more women in VC, getting them into partnership, but also have networks and cohorts with emerging managers. And so I'm in that. I'm in a group well, anyway, I'm in several groups, and Carrie and I have helped coordinate a women in VC group in Austin and in Houston and in Dallas. And so we have in our own world now, we see and know a lot of the women GPs. So it's not.
That's a good change, though.
It's,
Got validated by the sneeze. It's yeah, it has some astrological significance. I can say that because I'm into it.
well, then
Yeah.
tell me more. Tell me more about how we solve this problem.
It's just that whenever you sneeze, your heart skips a beat, and then it says like God blessed you, and then you're back to your life, because your heart started pumping again. So it's like
Oh.
that moment when God is over you. And when I said that it's a good news that there are more women GPs, and then you sneezed, it's like mingling of the God and the GP. So
I see.
yeah, it's a
Good.
bit weird, but
Good
yeah. Since you only invest in women entrepreneurs, do you prefer, solo women founders? Because there's this data that the less funding which went out of the total funding pool, which was just about 2%, was only to solo women founders, since many didn't prefer investing in them as opposed to solo male founders. So is that the same case while investing from your side, or do you look for a co-founder women in a business?
We actually love the idea of gender diversity, and that the magic happens with the diversity of perspectives. That certainly doesn't mean, like, our latest investment, which we haven't announced yet, is 3 women founders. So we love that. It's not that we won't invest when there's all women, but we don't proactively look for like a male founder or something like that. But we love diversity. So yeah, but there's absolutely a bias with, you can see the data of all women founded versus at least one woman founder. And I think it's like 2% all women founded, and then like 17% or something like this of when there's just one woman on the founding team. So other investors are a lot more comfortable when there's at least one, it's not all women.
Yeah. And so long as the business is good, like, nobody will care about the co-founder if only the one person can run the show very well.
I don't know. I mean, the biggest blind spot, I just thought it's crazy, is so I can't answer for all these people that don't look at the data.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we'll invest in those women founded companies all day. So
Yes.
We'll take it. Good for us.
Yeah. So we'll move into the last segment of our interview, which is the rapid fire round, where I'll
Okay.
ask you some questions around what work you do and how you help founders, and how founders or investors can learn from watching your interview. So to begin with, what are some of the mistakes that you notice in women founders particularly?
I think back to, they like to under promise and over deliver. And so sometimes aren't comfortable painting that picture of how big the opportunity could be. And so we've found there's ways in order to be more comfortable doing that by saying, if everything works like my dreams come true, this is what it would look like. So there are ways to get around that, but I think it's not natural. And so that's one of the biggest mistakes we see.
Yeah. And which was one of the most unique pitch that came across your way, maybe in terms of the message they wrote to you or the way they spoke about their product or service?
Well, one thing that sticks out in my mind was there was like a tampon that was used for some testing of like ovarian cancer, that kind of thing. And the entrepreneur was sharing some of the feedback she got from male investors that she was mainly pitching. And they were just saying, could this be applied to men? Like, how do we pivot this and look at how it could get into men's health? So give me a break. So that one certainly sticks out in my mind in terms of like how bad the problem is that like the current investment community doesn't see, is completely blind to some massive, massive markets like the health of 50% of the population.
Got it. And since you're US based, do you only invest in US based women entrepreneurs or outside the area as well?
We invest we have to invest in a legal entity that's in the United States. So we look at companies outside of the US all the time, but when we make the investment, we have to have the legal entity to invest in the US.
Got it. Yeah, so the incorporation could be in Delaware, New York, or wherever in the US for that matter.
Yes. And they
Got
could
it.
be headquartered somewhere else. They just have to have an entity in the US.
So it's fine if the entire team also sits out of maybe some other country and only the documentation is of US. Is that fine?
It is. We haven't done that yet, but theoretically it is. We just need to see also that there's a lot of focus in growth in the US market, because that's where we are and that's our background and that's where we can help. And we do tend to take a board seat and really be pretty hands-on. And so we're just not the right investors if it's, growth in Nigeria, because we just don't know that country, that market, and we can't be helped. We're not the right partners.
Got it. Speaking of the help, like, I'm just very curious to know if a woman has many investors on her cap table wanting to put money into her business, why should she choose to go with True Wealth VC? What is the strategic differentiation that you come with?
Yeah, yes. So I think it is this kind of hands-on nature of, we really want to be those thought partners at the early stage, at that seed stage level where they're really testing the product market fit and getting to the next stage. We also really help with fundraising, or try to help, with fundraising. And we have, since we invest at the pre-seed or seed, we know a lot of late seed, Series A types of investors. And so we've got a network there that we really try to help with. We also have our LPs, which co-invest alongside the fund. And so we can bring in, to date, about 50% of additional capital to the table on top of what our fund invests through our LPs alone.
Yeah, that's something new that I've heard, that you get the LP of the fund also with the fund to invest in a business, because usually you just have the fund investing in portfolio companies.
Yes, and that's quite an impressive network of LPs that we have that have all different operational and industry expertise. And so we often will pull them in for due diligence or for advisorship and that sort of thing. So they get not only me and Carrie, but our whole network, which is money and advice.
Got it. And what stage do you specifically prefer to come in any business?
So we call it seed, but that means so many different things these days, and it keeps changing. So for us, it's more that we look at the end point of the exit, and if we can, how many rounds the company will need to raise, who those potential acquirers are, what they buy companies for, what level of revenue they need to get to, or customer base, or IP stage, etc. And look at, okay, how many rounds is it going to take to get there? What's that potential acquisition valuation going to be? And, is that a good investment? So we even invested pre-revenue several times. It's more of that pathway to the exit, and if we can deliver the right multiple back to our, investors.
Have you taken any exits out of your investments yet?
We had our first exit, I think 2 weeks ago, that we announced.
Wow. And if you could just tell us about the journey of how your first check to their company was, and how did the investment happen, the journey of it?
Most of these companies that we have invested in, we've known for quite a while before we invest. And so this one as well, we'd been talking to them for a while. In fact, Well, the first 3 investments we've made out of Fund 2 now, I think the average time we've known the entrepreneur is over a year. It's like a year and a half even. So it's usually a story with everyone of, we often meet entrepreneurs before they're ready for investment, or they think they're ready, but they're not. We have to see some, and it's really helpful, I think, for entrepreneurs to know that it's okay if investors say no. They mostly will say no, but develop that relationship and have those conversations maybe before you're even comfortable. I guess that's back to mistakes that we see women entrepreneurs making. They often want to have their pitch completely ready and everything's perfect and they can answer every question and have their data room set up, versus just getting out there and telling people about what you're doing and seeing what the right fit is, because most entrepreneurs we meet, it's just too early. And so it's great to get to know them. We have a CRM where we keep all of our notes, and and then it's great when they come back.
Yeah, that's the great way to go about it. Just like how your co-founder should be somebody whom you know for at least a year or so that the trust factor gets built in. The similar way you need to know your portfolio company also.
Yes.
Instead, if it's a moonshot, which is like you have spotted out in the jungle of baby unicorns, that, oh, this is the one which will get me the most returns.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and since you are into women investing, most of these women also are into businesses or forming communities, like community-led businesses, which are more towards impact rather than revenue generating. So, what is the advice that you'd like to give to those kind of business models to become big or to make a mark, just like how you give to healthcare-led businesses?
Well, just to clarify, we're an impact investment fund in terms of our gender diversity, but also the markets in which we're investing, but we're absolutely for profit. Like, we want top tier VC returns. So we are not compromising on our expectations of the returns. We actually think that these markets, because of the positive impact they're having, they are really strong markets to invest in. And we see them as very acquisitive as well. And certainly with COVID, with massive weather events and climate change, they're increasingly important. And we've seen a lot of big brands, big companies having to buy greener and cleaner kinds of solutions as investors, but as customers and consumers demand it. So we're in it for the as capitalists as well.
Yeah. Right. Do you also, in your individual capacity, mentor or angel invest?
No, not really. I have, but at this point in time, it's so hard. There are only so many hours in the day, and because we do take those board seats, my calendar just with board meetings is pretty intense, and not let alone looking at all these new companies to invest in. And so we just realized we can't really mentor anymore. So we look for more like podcasts like this, or events where we can be on a panel and we can get to many people at once and be more efficient with our time.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, some people are like, work 18 hours, and people are like, don't promote this toxicity. You work and you sleep equally so that you can balance things out, rather than getting your things, getting your hands into everything. And yeah.
Yeah, learning to say no is quite an art.
Yeah, that is. Well, with this, we come to the end, and really loved speaking with you, Sara. Yeah.
Thank you. Great
Thanks.
connecting.
Have a good day ahead.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.